Hello, everyone. This is Al Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to a continuation of this fascinating series about the Qibla dilemma. And we are already dealing with some of the objections that will be raised against the data and interpretation of our brother Dan Gibson. Today, we are going to deal with a new objection compared to the ones that we've covered so far from Dr. King's perspective. This time, we're going to deal with an objection that it's probably an objection that is raised by the vast majority of people because they bought into this idea that Petra, at the time of Muhammad, the time when Islam came into the scene, according to the traditional dating, was a ruin, basically, as a city that didn't exist. Therefore, the concept or the idea of having a Qibla facing towards Petra doesn't make sense. That's basically the justification of this argument. However, we'll let Dan help us now unpack this particular objection. So, Dan, what do you say to something like that?
I say I used to believe that too. That was the standard interpretation of that Petra had Petra slowly decreased, and eventually, maybe during the time of Muhammad, there might have been a few people living there, maybe a few Christians or something, but that basically the city was in ruins. That was the standard interpretation until 1998. And that's when the Petra scrolls were found. There was a church there. There are 4 church buildings in Petra. And in one of those, they were excavating, the archaeologists, and they were in a back room, and they found a whole bunch of burned papers. Unfortunately, they didn't sneeze when they found them because they were in charcoal-like papers.
Was that like a Geniza? Was that like a Geniza, basically burning some documentations?
No, well, I don't know exactly. They were just there. The walls had fallen down. Some of the things on top of them, they were preserved there. They got these documents out and discovered they were scrolls all wrapped up. And if they cut them, and they got a team of specialists, they didn't do it out in the field. They brought them in and had people around the world to decide how they're going to open these. And then they discovered that they could take different kinds of light and photography and look at them, and they could begin to see how they were written. But they ended up with literally thousands of little pieces of paper, as well as some pages and half pages and so forth. So it took them a long time to work on them. So the next 2 years, this was a big project of unwrapping them and putting them all out. Actually, it's 4 years, I think it was, before they actually were able to publish the data that they found. So in 2002, they published, this was the American Center for Oriental Research, they published a series of books. I have them here. It's this big set here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 volumes. I won't pull them out. Every bit is a photograph, so I could be able to look at the photographs, and then they had went through and then they transliterated this all down, and then they translated it into English, so you can check both of these as you go along. And we have today the Petra Scrolls. There's some things we can learn. First of all, the Petra Scrolls are records of one family. They had them stored somewhere at the church somewhere, so I guess if their house got burned, the records are somewhere else. So it's the kind of thing that one family would put in a safety deposit box and stick it away. So not very exciting stuff. There are bills, there are receipts, contracts for marriage, court records, things like that. Just different transactions, a lot of tax receipts. And they just put them away for safekeeping, and they were safe kept all the way up until now. Now in this century, we can pull them out centuries and centuries later and look at them. What did this tell us?
Right.
It tells us that this was an active city. There were marriages going on. There were bills being paid. There were lots of different activities taking place, buying and selling and so forth. I mean, there was even a record of somebody stole something, and here's a record of stuff that was stolen out of the house and things like this. A lot of real estate transactions and describing the property and how far the boundaries were and where everything was. So this was an active city during the time of Muhammad. What's interesting is that when these scrolls were burned, Muhammad would have been a young man. And so this is during his lifetime. Before he got his revelation, these scrolls were written up and were in that church. And so they describe to us the city during the time that Muhammad was growing up in his teens. So it's an active city. It's functioning very well. And there's some very interesting things as we learn there. We discover that there was no judge in Petra. They had to call in a man whose name was Abu Karib ibn Jabala. He was a Ghassanid ruler, and he would come in to settle the major court cases. And so the judge didn't even live in Petra, and he wasn't a Petra resident. He was from outside. So it begins to change our view of the city a little bit. We learn that Petra had 4 churches, and so there are 4, and we can go back and we can look at those 4 churches. Now, before we get all excited, the blue church, which they've excavated, fits about 100 people. The red church, or the ridge church, fits about 140 worshipers. The Church of St. Mary, which is the largest one, fits 360 worshipers. And there's a tomb that was a large tomb turned into a cathedral, fits about 300 people. So altogether, we have around 900 to 1,000 people would fit into the 4 churches for worship. So that counters the idea that this was a great Christian city. We don't get that idea from the papers, but this is a Christian family. But on the other hand, there are pagans temples there, and they're still functioning. So if you say Petra was an empty city, there is proof that it was a fully functioning city, and that life was going on. And if you say, well, it was a Christian city, it doesn't appear to be a fully Christian city, as it were, because the population wasn't all Christianized. In fact, if you look at the archaeological footprint that's there, you will discover that only all the Christian things fit into 1/4 of the city. In the northeast corner, there are 4 churches, and with that tomb. To the north of that, there are the Christian tombs, which are outside of the city, marked with a cross just there. But all the other places have no crosses, and there's no evidence of Christian presence in the rest of the city. So yes, there were Christians there. The question is, was it a Christian city, or was it just a multicultural, multi-religious city?
Right.
Because there were temples still functioning at this time. There were the Temple of Alat, there was the Temple of Dushera, and there were other temples that were active, and large temples, many places where worship could take place, all throughout the city. So if people come along and tell us, well, it was a Christian city, there's questions come out of this. If they come and say, well, the Byzantines were in control, that's actually not true. We know that the Byzantines had a problem. They had a huge empire to control, whether north, south, east, west. They were struggling because they were being attacked by the Persians. They were being attacked in the north by different barbarians. And so how do you protect this? You couldn't have military presence everywhere. Now there's a book that's written, and I pulled it off my shelf the other day. I don't know if you can read that. This is the function of the Roman army in southern Arabia, Petra. And this is the function of the army right in the area of Petra. And it tells us, and we look at this, there was no Byzantine army in Petra. Didn't exist. There was no Byzantine administration in Petra. They didn't have it. There was no court system in Petra that was Byzantine, with Byzantine judges. The judge that came in that was for these court cases was from the Ghassanids. Now, the Ghassanids were a Christian tribe, an Arab Christian tribe. They had quite a large area they controlled, and they were in control of this area. They were a client tribe to the Byzantines. So Byzantines are way up north. Byzantine have this by name only, but really the area is controlled by the Ghassanids, and they have other capital cities, other places they are. Petra is really kind of backwater. It's at the very southern end of the Byzantine Empire, and it's not the Christian city that people make it out to be. And so when we talk about Petra, we recognize that it fits more the description of early Mecca than we might realize, because in this city there were Christians. You remember Khadija has relatives who were Christians.
Right.
And she has cousins who were Christians. And there were Christians there. There were pagans living there in that city. And so Christian and pagan worship happening side by side. And Muhammad comes along and he's preaching to the pagans. Now, the Christians aren't opposed to him because he's talking to pagans, calling them back to worship the one true God, saying we need to follow the religion of Abraham. So the Christians are, this young man is probably confused. He doesn't know very much, but he's not telling people to leave the Christian faith.
Right. And in fact, the
message hasn't developed to that. Go ahead.
I mean, there is at least a couple of verses in the Quran that says that the Christians, the Jews, and the Sabaean, all of them are good. Basically, they're going to go to heaven. And, it makes sense to think of these groups going up north to Petra versus in Mecca. For instance, the Sabia or Sabaeans make sense to be in that region versus down south.
That's right. Yeah. So there was some Christian presence and different groups. Now, if you go back to Eusebius, way back 3rd century, 4th century, he gives us a description of Petra. He said that's where all of the heretics go. People who were Christian heretics came up with weird ideas. They would be shunned and thrown out, and they would go to a place like Petra. So it was already known as a place where just sort of people, who were pushed out of areas because of their strange beliefs ended up down in Petra. And that was the what do you call it? The reputation that Petra had among the Byzantines is it was a city where heretics hung out. And so here I want to comment. He's preaching again.
Absolutely. I want to comment another thing about what you just said, because that makes sense also why the Quran did not represent the true doctrines of Christianity, rather represented heretical views of Christianity.
Yeah, it was a city of heretics. And so for me, that fits the pattern. It was an active city. And when I look at that city, the description helps me understand early Islamic history much better than somebody 1,000 miles down to the south in Mecca, out in the desert, with no contact at all with Christians and Jews and everybody else.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you so much, brother. What other objection you think we're going to venture into next time, if we want to give our viewers a teaser here?
Another objection is that Petra doesn't appear in Islamic literature. So we're going to look at the names of Petra in Islamic literature and in the Quran. And I think we will find Petra in the Quran.
We will, indeed. Well, that's wonderful, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Hopefully you're enjoying this amazing video series, and hope you find it, helpful in terms of strengthening that what I want to call the Gibson thesis, basically, because our brother worked hard into presenting these data to us, went to these places, visited these places, used scientific tools and technology to present his data to us in the form of publications. And we're hoping that his way of responding to these, while we call them logical arguments, at least from my perspective, they sound to me more on the emotional side than on the factual or scientific side. And that's what we're looking for. We welcome any scientific data that give the appearance maybe of refuting these arguments. In fact, we invite anyone who have such data to appear with us in this show. We'll even ask our brother Dan Gibson to appear with that person and have a civil dialogue corresponding to each other's findings, because at the end of the day, we want to present things in a clear manner without any appearance of twisting facts or twisting datas or as if we have an agenda one way or another. That's not our motive at all. We want to just present facts, and we want our Muslim friends who are very intelligent people to go and inspect these data and see what they can find and let us know. Until we meet again next time with another objection, everyone, have a blessed day. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel Sira International and click on the bell so that you receive notifications whenever we publish a new video or go live. I would also like to appeal to you to consider becoming a Patreon patron by clicking the link right below. By doing so, you can give towards the production of these videos. There are also other options for you where you can give to our channel. I thank you from the bottom of my heart.